Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Good Morning Game Masters. Today, we are discussing, are too many GMs trying to be novelists instead of game masters? I'm the GM philosopher. John Haney is with us here in the uh, in the studio. We are minus Kelf today. Unfortunately, Kelf was busy. So it's going to be just John and I today, and who knows? Maybe we'll take some calls or something later if we get this talked about to a sufficient amount to try to fill in some of the space in Kelf's absence. We'll miss Kelf very much in this episode. With that being said, this is a really good topic. Are too many GMs trying to be novelists? Are they trying to tell too much of a story? I feel like I have been talking about this a lot. I feel like I've gotten a lot of questions about this lately on the live streams, especially. And, sometimes I think that GMs try to do too much story. And sometimes they don't do enough letting player characters tell the story or just create the story as they go. And that's what this episode's about. We're going to break it down. We're going to talk about it. And welcome to the show. John, how is your morning going so far?
Uh, so far, pretty good. Uh, actually, woke up with some energy today after a session last night. I was busy not trying to write a novel, if that gives you any indication as to my take on this topic. But it's definitely a balancing act. Was up late last night when Kelf dropped the writing prompts in here. So he's still here, even though he's not present with us right now. A lot of his talking points are still there, and looking at it. It's a really good topic to discuss, I think, because uh, D&D is referred to as a story game a lot of times, and it is. However, there are also games where, even in the roots of the hobby, you see um, one shots or these modules that were created that could be inserted into any given story or were just intended as one offs, and not necessarily as part of a greater campaign. But I think the story was originally, or the game was originally thought of as a, hey, well, we take wargaming, let's focus on an individual character, and that way you can go on this journey like Lord of the Rings or like any of these other novels that Gygax and Arneson were reading and big fans of. And so it's kind of it's an interesting topic then, and there are a lot of good talking points here. I think that that first talking point. I mean, like, long story short, if you want my the boiled down opinion before we get to the nitty gritty, is there are definitely game masters who want to be novelists, and I think those game masters should just be novelists, because it is a collaborative thing. It is a game. It's a story game. So that there's a balancing act there, but it is, at the end of the day, a game. And I feel like if players wanted to go through a pre-scripted story, they would play Skyrim, or they'd do something like that. The freedom, part of the beauty of D&D is the ability to actually affect the story as a player. So there is a balance there, and I think there's a lot of good talking points. So I'm excited to get into
Yeah.
it.
Heck yeah. Now, before we dive too deep into this, I want to give a big shout out to our partner level Ko-Fi supporters, David and Solstice. Thank you so much for supporting the channel, for everything that you do behind the scenes here at GM Philosophy. I also want to shout out our latest gold level supporter, Craig, who is actually in the chat right now. Craig, thank you so much for everything that you do. We really appreciate you and all the contributions you make. Craig is also a player in our Dunes of Fate campaign, as is John, who is one
Yeah.
of our counselors. And I just want to also add that there are some resources in the description if anyone watching would like to join the Discord, if anyone would like to sign up for the email list, get the free top 10 tips Game Master's ebook and such. If you want to become a Ko-Fi supporter, link to all those things are in the descriptions. But all right, let's dive into this. Going to give a little quick shout out to some of the people in the chat. We have Garrick in the chat. Great to see you, Garrick. Craig is here. Herminator's here. We've got Steven Matta. Let's see. Who else we got? Cog is here. Scott McFarlane. When I say Cog, I mean cognoscente, but I feel like we've talked about this. I usually pronounce it wrong.
Cog is easier.
Cog is easier. But yeah, Craig, it's great to see you. Great to have you here. Okay, so the first talking points here: is your campaign a book or a game? And then there are some prompts here: story first or player first? Are game masters crafting narratives or railroading through their epic plot? Then there's the plot armor problem, and then there's novel versus sandbox. Can a GM write a plot the players actually shape? Okay, I'm going to give my 2 cents on this. And sometimes I get pushback on this. And, this is Good Morning Game Masters. We're here to talk about the real stuff. And I kind of feel like I have said this more in the last week than I have ever in the past on this channel. Oh, Waz is in the chat. How's it going, Waz?
Nice.
I feel like I've said this a lot, but here's the thing. I think the game, and I'm going to say it actually in a less refined way maybe right now. I'm just going to say it because this is the Good Morning Game Masters show. I think Game Masters do need to let go of the idea of plot. I think they need to let go of it, and they need to realize the plot is being created as we play the game. And it's not something that I should project onto the game right now. Having plans is great. Having an idea of where the game is going is great. Having an idea of an end game, an end boss, an end goal is great. However, if players aren't, or if game masters aren't careful, if they project plot onto it, then they're going to take away the writing experience from the people who actually should be writing probably 90% of the story, which is the player characters. And I do realize that this leads to a situation where you have to be more sandboxy and you have to improvise more. I know that there are some game masters out there. Herminator and I have had this conversation. Herminator's here. Herminator and I have had this conversation a lot. Herminator says, I'm not an improvisational game master. I like to prepare my sessions, so I like to know what the players are going to do. And so to this kind of game master, I would say, then take the approach Herminator takes. Ask the players beforehand. Well, what do you plan to do? Like next session, do you plan to like camp first, or do you plan to like camp or do you plan to go to the tavern? That way I can prepare the session adequately. But ultimately though, that's still putting the choice in the player's hands, and their player characters get to make that decision. But then a lot of times I hear the question, well, I have the story idea, but the player characters do this other thing. How do I make it work? It's like you make it work by honestly letting go of the story idea. There are maybe background things going on, but player characters should be the authors of the destiny of their characters. The player's choices should be. And then we have the very best games when we step back and we're willing to let go of all our preconceived ideas. If I'm thinking, well, the players are going to go to the tavern, but then they say, then randomly they say, okay, well, the one place we don't want to go is that tavern because of XYZ. And then I think to myself, so that literally they're doing the opposite of what I thought they were going to do. There might be a temptation to be like, but I had this planned and this and that and this and that. But it's like the game is so much better when I let go of that and I think, okay, they're going to the forest instead. There might be some improv coming up. There might be maybe there are some story type things that I'm going to move to the forest that were going to happen at the tavern, and I can make that seamless. Maybe I need to put that on hold because it's not the right timing, and that's okay. And maybe instead there's a different encounter in the forest that I come up with on the fly. But the fact of the matter is that letting the players have this agency of choosing where they're going to go, and then just not resisting it, not trying to like herd them to a specific place, just letting them make choices and then rolling with that and then keeping the world consistent and immersive throughout. I think that this is the
Yeah.
approach. This is the approach that's going to result in the best story. And then, just as a final thought, what is plot? What's the plot of my story? We as game masters, this is kind of hard to do, but we I think it's in our best interest to let go of the idea of plot and to understand, well, I don't know what the plot is. I won't know until we reach the end. And then I'm going to look back and I'll realize what the plot was as we were doing it. But the truth is that
Mhm.
there's no way to know. And if I try to project plot onto it, I'm going to railroad my players. And then this will take away from the agency sandbox experience. And the more sandboxy we have it, in my opinion, this is just my opinion, the more sandboxy we can make it, the better that game is going to feel for the players, and the more immersive it's going to be, and the more creative they're going to be as they role play and they create this destiny of their characters in the story. So boom, there's my 2 cents.
Yeah.
I feel like I've said that exact same thing like 10 times in the last
Yeah. There
7
you go.
videos, but it's but this is so appropriate to exactly what we're talking about this morning.
Yeah.
Anyway, John, what do you think about it?
So there's the chat question there, and be feel free to throw your answers in as a player. It says, "Have you ever felt like your choices didn't matter because the GM already wrote the story?" Or I guess as GMs in the chat, have you ever made that mistake? Have you ever made it to where your players were trying to have agency and they didn't get to have that because you were too focused on a story that you had to have happen? And there's the interesting question here: story first or players first? Are GMs crafting narratives or railroading through their epic plot? I think the epic plot. It is an interesting point because I think we all want to have um, these epic stories. We want Lord of the Rings. We want, I mean, I've never read it, but Game of Thrones. We want like these, we want these sagas. And the issue with that, and I think this was brought up in the Discord a couple of weeks ago, actually, now, and I forget who said it, was this idea of, well, when you're writing a novel, um, you are in charge of everything. You're in charge of every character. You're in charge of the antagonist, the protagonist. You're in charge of uh, all of what's going on, and you can craft every single element of it. When we're playing a game, and I said this in last week's episode of Good Morning Game Masters, it's not my story, it's our story. And so that is an interesting point right there. GMs crafting a narrative or railroading. I think the part that the GMs can craft, and this gets into the novel versus sandbox as well. Can a GM write a plot that the players actually shape? The part that the GM does, and it's one of the later talking points, is world building primarily, whether you're studying a world or creating your own. You are the world builder. You are the curator of the setting. And the other part that you get to do is a kind of fun moment with my theater sort of background is I get called on a lot of times to be a bad guy in plays, and then so I'm almost kind of typecast that way. But you get to be the bad guy. You get to know who the big bad even is. Sometimes the players don't even discover that until later. You get to know what they're up to, why, who are their minions, what forces do they have in the world. Are they aware of the players, or are they just full steam ahead doing what they do? You get to be the Professor Moriarty to Sherlock Holmes. You get to be the Sauron to the player's Aragorn. You get to be you get to be the bad guy. The tricky part is you don't get to control the players. I think the mistake starts to happen when the GM starts to control the players. And sometimes what you expected the players to do is not what they do at all. And I think that's the danger in this mentality of, well, railroad versus sandbox. And there's kind of an in between. there, because you are in control of what the villain does and what the world does. You're not in control of what the players do. And so that's where what we do in prep needs to be very separated in our minds from what happens at the table.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting thing.
It is.
The
And that's kind of the
Yeah.
unique part of the craft of game mastering too, because it is
Hmm.
different than
Yeah.
writing, because there's this element of game mastering where it's like it's like I'm kind of trying to prepare something
Hmm.
that is linear, but I also kind of have to prepare for the unexpected because I don't know what the others are going to co-create.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the second talking point there in that first header is the plot armor problem. Are NPCs and world events too scripted for players to really change anything? I remember in the Elder Scrolls games, the it happened in Morrowind a couple of times where I was playing along and I had killed an NPC, and the message actually came up on the screen: "You have broken the world. This NPC is not meant to die yet. Would you like to revert to your last quick save and find another solution, or do you want to continue in a broken world where the plot can no longer be completed?" And I was like, "Oh, um, well, I guess I don't want to play in a broken world. I'll revert to my last quick save." And I
What kind
feel
of
like,
question is that?
yeah, I feel like GMs kind of do that sometimes, where they're like, "Oh no, you guys weren't supposed to see that, or you guys weren't supposed to kill that guy. You were supposed to kill this guy. You weren't supposed to go here. You were supposed to go there." And that's where I think the GM craft, like you were talking about, you cannot prepare for what the player's going to do. You can kind of ask them ahead of time. I think is a smart thing to do. Hey, are you going to the tavern or are you going to the forest? That way you can kind of set that up ahead of time. But you shouldn't tell them, okay, so when you go to the forest, hold up, now you're taking away their agency. They might deal with the problems a whole different way. So controlling the world, or the world building aspect, yeah, 100% the game master. Controlling the villain and what they do, 100% the game master. But what the players do, be really really careful with that, because if they might take a completely different approach. In my campaign right now, my players have several times taken a very different approach than what I expected them to, and that uh, I agree with what you said at the beginning. That has made the game better. I feel like that has given me more plot points. That has given me more things. Okay, well, how would the villain react to this, or the villain's minion? They haven't even gotten to the main villain yet. They're dealing with lieutenants and all this kind of stuff, um, and that does make the game better. Because what I had planned, the game might be over by now, but we're still dealing with this and that, and personal subplots and all kinds of stuff, which I think is really really great. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, the
Um,
plot armor is a tricky one. You want to be careful with that.
yeah.
Because plot armor almost like takes away not only player agency, but it takes away consequences. And if there's no consequences, why? One of the hot takes, which is a sub point, is every time swords are drawn, somebody could die. Um, if the
Yeah.
players know they're going to win, don't even have a combat. Every combat should be deadly. If
Yeah.
the puzzle is going to be solved, don't have the puzzle. Have it, make sure that consequences are really really important. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a couple really good comments I would love to jump in on here. So Stephen Meta says, "Same. I can't improve, and I think it's improvise on the spot.
Hmm.
I need to have a plan in mind, and rolling on random tables seems redundant to me." Okay, so this is actually not. So this is a good thing to be aware of, I think, and like Herminator and I have talked about many times, I think that this is very valid to say I'm not an improvisational game master. I don't want to improv 90% of like what goes on in a
Hmm.
session. I want to prep it, which is very valid. And to that, Stephen, and to people who basically are in this role, they're like, I don't want to be so improvisational. I want to run stuff that I
Hmm.
prepare. I want to prepare awesome stuff and run it. I would just say, have this conversation with players at the beginning of your game, session zero. Say to the players, so look, here's the thing. I'm not the kind of GM who wants to like improv a bunch of stuff. And therefore, it's really important to me to kind of know where we're heading. And so I just want to let you guys know, are you the kinds of players who are going to kind of follow the storyline that is offered to you in the story? Because that's the kind of game that I want to run. I kind of want to, there's like a story in mind, and then I want to play a game where players are going to kind of follow the story. Talking about this in session zero, I think, and I'm getting more and more like this as I run more games and get more, I would say, get more, even more experience. I've been running games for 20 years, and I have gone more and more in this direction. Talk about this before the
Hmm.
game starts, especially if you're playing a game that's like a mystery game that requires setting up
Hmm.
like intricate clues and stuff. There's a lot of that stuff that actually is really challenging to improvise, and sometimes it's nearly impossible to set up a good like whodunit
Hmm.
improvisationally. And a
Yeah.
lot of times having players willing to follow a thread is important. So Steven, there's nothing wrong with that, and that does not
Yeah.
make you a bad
That,
GM. And
yeah, I don't think so either. I think a solution also, as well as like having a plot and still allowing your players agency, is to sort of have a wrap up mechanic where at the end of every session you ask the players. You don't end with necessarily a cliffhanger. You end with the simple question: leave maybe a space of 10 minutes or 5 minutes even, and just ask the players, "Where are you going next? What are you doing
yeah,
next? We're wrapping up the session, but what do I need to prepare for next week or
yeah,
next month or however often your game is? If that is the case where you're trying to run like a nice narrative type campaign and you want that epic
and
feel to it, but you
and you
still
want to
need
prepare.
the yeah, you want to prepare, but you also want to give your players agency. I would say use that wrap up
Yeah,
mechanic.
absolutely. That's
I would
exactly
recommend.
what I would do. I'm a very improvisational GM. I'm super comfortable in the improvisation space. Stephen also said I pre-roll my random encounters during session prep and tie them to the story beats. Now Garrick followed this
Hmm.
up with, I'll ad lib the whole thing, but my players know the stuff I've pre-planned is going to be better than a bunch of half random ad lib stuff. I'm going to be super honest with you right now. I think the top 10 sessions I've ever run, of the top 10 sessions I've ever run playing D&D, probably like maybe one or two of them were actually pre-planned. Some of the very best sessions I've ever run as a game master, where my players had the most fun, where it was the most memorable, happened when I was deep in improvisation. So
Hmm.
so I feel like this is very, like when Garrick says players know the stuff I've pre-planned is going to be better than a bunch of half random ad lib stuff. Once again, I feel like it's really important to know yourself as a game master. If this is true for you, Garrick, then you are probably a planning GM as opposed to an improvisational GM, right?
Hmm.
But I will say that I don't think so. This is not a bad thing. It's just being aware of it, and it's also being aware of what kind of style you want to be, what kind of style you want to be. But I would also encourage game masters, don't be afraid of improvisation and lean
Yeah.
into it and be confident. And you might
Yeah.
find that there is a lot of fuel that you can get for that. Craig says leaving
Yeah.
space and silence for us in the last Dunes of Faith session was a new experience for me. Not used to no railroads. It was great.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a good example. The last Dunes of Faith session, there was a lot of empty space because we were just, it was the
Yeah.
players deciding the next step to take, the next direction, and
Can we
that
go back
took,
to Garrick's real quick?
yeah, yeah, this one here.
Yeah. So as far as that, but I usually draw from my literary background. I'm going to draw from theater once again. There's two types of actors. There's the script actors. They know exactly what the director wants them to do. They know the line very precisely. They know exactly where they're supposed to stand on the stage, and they know kind of what that is. That they play the script exactly the way it's supposed to be. And then there's method actors. These are the actors who really get into the character. They try to embody the character. They kind of loosely know what happens through the scene. They might not always get the lines exactly right, but they always get the right ideas, and they react better to what other characters say on stage. They're reacting because they're embodying the character. They don't have to memorize a ton of cues that, oh, when they say this, I need to do this. When they say this, I need to do this. But they're, because they're embodying the character through that method acting, their improv on stage is a lot more true to life. It's a lot more lifelike. And like I said, the lines might not be exactly perfect, but the moods are all going to be there. The ideas are all going to be there. They're still going to hit those beats correctly. And that's a more, um, it's a deeper way, I think, to act. And it's not that one is right or wrong. Some actors are very much method actors, and some actors are very much script actors. I mean, like Johnny Depp is your quintessential method actor. He embodies a character, stays in character on the set the whole time, and all this stuff. Whereas I've heard like Harrison Ford, for example, legend, right? But he's a script guy. He memorizes the script. He practices every single thing in cues and stance and all this stuff. Is there a right or wrong? No, but there are these two styles to be aware of. And I
Yeah,
think, you know,
yeah.
studying that method acting and the world and the villains, like I said before, you're in charge of the world building, you're in charge of the villains. The more that you kind of understand your world and the more that you understand your villains, I think ad libbing becomes a lot easier. That improv becomes a lot easier. So that's what I would say to game masters who say that they struggle with improv. Not that that's a bad thing, but you can work on it. There are things you can do to kind of fix that.
You can. And I would also I actually high key think that a lot of game masters are better at improv than they think they are. And
Yes.
and and that there might be an element of like, well, I'm afraid that it'll turn out bad if
Mm-hmm.
I'm not prepared this much or whatever, which
Mm-hmm.
is very, I mean, I totally understand that. I totally understand that. But for me, that in the past has led to over preparedness, which has then led to the
Mm-hmm.
temptation to railroad it, right?
Yeah.
Now I want to talk about this
Yeah,
leaving
absolutely.
silence and space. So John, like the last Students of Fate
Yeah.
session it was a lot of empty space. Actually, there was a
Yeah.
lot of the session that took place in the exact same location, and the players just basically kind of arranging themselves and orienting, and there wasn't a lot going on in it from an action standpoint. But
Yeah.
so and I want to know what your take on this is. Craig said that here he thought it was great, and
Mm-hmm.
there's a temptation as the game master in a session like that. I think to myself, there's this temptation to be like, we got to get things going, we got to get things rolling. I don't want it to be
Mm-hmm.
boring. I want it to be snapping, to get moving. But then at the same time, I also know we'll just hold on. This is a player led narrative,
Mm-hmm.
and what do the players want to do? And sometimes the
Yeah.
players need time to decide what they want to do, and they need space to do it in.
Mm-hmm.
And so so that to me is why some sessions, they kind of are, they move to a space that I call very chill, where the game master takes a step back and then just lets the player characters do what they're going to do. And then there's a point where they're going to choose to take some kind of action. And it's like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
now we start filling in those pixels, but I really want to give them the space to wait and take
Yeah.
action.
You know,
What do you think as a player in that game? What do you think about that?
I really enjoyed that space because well, it's a new campaign. It was only session two. We were
Yeah.
adding uh, more characters to the campaign. We only had three in session one, and now we have five. We have um, so there's all these considerations. We're trying to kind of establish, you know, party mechanics. We have a couple of martial characters, rogue, caster. You know, we have these different things going on, and we're still trying to figure out what happened as well in that campaign. So I think giving space for those moments to kind of develop organically is really important from the player perspective because otherwise it starts to feel like cutscene. Whereas we need to interact with each other as characters, but also be able to interact with the world, that's why it was cool when we were talking with the salamander right up front, that sort of idea of like, well, that salamander wasn't just constantly interjecting, stuff, but he would talk when spoken to. We found that trade caravan, and it's not like we were, being led through a series of cutscenes. When we got there, we were allowed to interact with a few different NPCs and try to figure out, what's the dynamic here. And I feel like that's going to lead us in certain directions, uh, going into session 3. So I think giving space is really important, and I think when you give your players a couple of minutes, they come up with stuff. Because here's another thing, mind-boggling truth bomb here, is that the players are improving all the time.
Yeah, that is true.
And so, and if we as game masters don't like stuff dropped on us, it's like, oh no, I wanted to prepare all that. Then, well, think about this: the players are doing that all of the time. Maybe give them a minute, give them 30 seconds to figure out, okay, what would I say here, or what would my character say, what would we do, kind of like talking back and forth, a little bit of table chatter. And that, giving them space, really lends itself to a more vibrant game. I think so. And some really great role play too. I've had moments where one of my players has come up with some amazing stuff, but she needed a minute first. And it almost felt like dead air because her camera didn't work either. So I was like, "Are you there?"
Yeah, yeah,
But I held back and I waited. And her solution, her little monologue that she gave was like amazing. And that's something that we need to, don't fill all the space, don't prep every conversation, don't do all that. Giving your players a little bit of space, but understanding your NPCs so that you can improvise when needed is really
yeah.
important.
Understanding the motivations,
Yeah.
as Nyla
Yeah.
said here, and this is what you were saying about theater method acting.
Hmm.
Knowing motivations helps a
Yeah.
lot, helps with improv, and it absolutely does. Now,
Hmm.
Herminator has a great question here. I think that this is very good. I'd like to talk about this for a minute. For the narratively epic campaign, how do you and the players avoid a seemingly random "let's run a tavern instead of saving the world" player choice? Okay, so now this is exactly what we're talking about. This is a fantastic question. This gets right down to the actual problem, which is,
Hmm.
I'm a GM. I want to run an epic campaign or whatever kind of campaign you want to run. It's like, how do I make that the case and not have my
Hmm.
campaign turn into something completely different because I'm trying to give player agency? So this is the challenge, right?
Hmm.
And Herminator is exactly laying that out right here. And this is the classic problem. Um, it's like I want to run gritty, realistic campaigns with serious tones. I don't want to run like a comedic campaign. That's always my premise. Like that's what I'm
Hmm.
always doing, or what I'm wanting to do. So it's like, I think talking about this. This is a session zero. This isn't even session zero. This is a um, when you're recruiting players, you say,
Hmm.
here's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a narratively epic campaign. That's what I want to run. That's what I'm going to run. Are you the kind of player who's down with this? Because if you're the kind of player who is going to go start a tavern and abandon the main plot line that's kind of set before you, this probably isn't the kind of game for you. Not that I'm trying to
Hmm.
railroad, but I want to tell a narratively epic story with the player characters. That this is very valid. As a GM, you
Yeah.
should be able to, and you should not feel like it's a wrong choice to say, this is what I want to run as a campaign. I'm looking for people who are compatible with me in that vision. But then when you find the good players who are willing to do that with you, here's the truth of it: giving them agency to make choices and tell the story of their characters is going to set up a more, and this is just from my experience, it's going to set up a more narratively epic campaign than you probably ever could have written with 100 years of prep. because when you collaborate with all these people, you're telling a story that's told by, five, six, seven people instead of one person. And it always turns out to be so much more creative, so interesting. And it's the stuff that you don't expect that makes it magical and makes that's where the magic of TTRPGs come from. So then while you're choosing the right players for this kind of campaign you want to run, also don't be afraid to hand the keys to the vehicle to your players and let them take a turn at the wheel to drive the story, and to not be afraid to veer off where you expected it to go, because the
Mhm.
truth is that you might come up with something, and probably will come up with something even better than you ever imagined it, but it's going to feel frustrating if we don't let it go. Herminator
Yeah.
then said, if player choice determines the story, what is the point of the GM making a villain with plans? Doesn't feel like a living, breathing world if player choice is ultimately what drives the story. So,
Ooh.
okay, John, do you want to jump on this one? You jump into this.
Yeah.
This is a super good question. This is a really good
And it kind of ties into the last one too.
Yeah.
And in that sense, well, it depends on your villain's plans. How big are your villain's plans? What effect will it actually have on the world? Will they run away and start a tavern? Um, uh, or will they go engage the story hook that you have? I think eventually a butterfly effect is going to happen, and eventually what the villain is doing is going to affect the players in some way. And I think that's your answer to the first question, which is, how do you get them from running away and starting a tavern? One of my favorite moments in the movie, I mean, it came out a while now, is in Guardians of the Galaxy, where Rocket Raccoon is like, why don't we just run to the edge of the galaxy, run to the edge of the universe, and maybe, just maybe, we get to lead full lives before all this terrible stuff happens. And then they're like, or we could go save the world. And he's like, okay, fine. But that moment where Rocket Raccoon kind of becomes a hero is in that moment where he's like, you know what, he realizes eventually this is going to catch up to us. Eventually what's happening is gonna find us, and we have the power right now in this moment to make a choice and take a stand. Are you going to be one of the mindless rabble who runs around screaming in the background of those movies? I mean, because it has to be said, there's always somebody in the background. There's the screaming crowd that's running away from the villain, and then there's the heroes, and that might only be five people, that might only be one person, but they're the ones willing to take a stand against what's happening. And I would say, challenge your players when you make a character, make somebody at least altruistic enough to where, when presented with the choice and the ability to do the right thing, they will.
Yeah.
And so, what's the point of the GM making a villain with plans? I mean, it's the GM's then kind of job, when you're creating the villain, when you're creating the whatever the villain is doing, make sure that you think of ways this is going to find the characters. Even if they do run the opposite direction as fast as they can, this is going to find them. This is going to hunt them down. It's going to haunt them. Eventually the thugs are going to kick in their tavern door and demand all the cash, or eventually the bandits are going to get so bad on the road that they no longer have any customers in their tavern, or
Yeah.
eventually the beholder's going to come up through the basement. I don't know. That eventually the plot's going to find them, even if they do go start a tavern.
Yeah.
It might not be the way you thought of, but the villain, you know what the villain is doing, and you should, as also the world builder, you should know what effect that's going to have on the world. Now your job as the game master, part of your prep, is to figure out how does that interact with what the players are doing.
Yeah.
And so that's the living, breathing world right there. And it is work. You have to think about it. You have to understand cause and effect. You have to understand your world building. You have to understand your world's economics. You have to understand your world's government. You have to understand your world's magic system and interplanar relations. You have to understand a lot of stuff, but that's how you can give players agency and still have the narrative companion.
And I'll say this too. One of the tricks to this, and so it's like when you ask this question, if player choice determine, I know I'm continuing to talk about this because this is such. So Herminator just made this question has
It's a
so
great
much.
question. It's a great
It
question.
it has so much value in talking about literally the crux of this conversation. If player choice determines the story, what is the point of the GM making a villain with plans? This, if I was going to restate this a little bit, I would almost say then like, well, if player choice determines the story, how in the world, am I ever going to create a villain that they're going to care about and choose to pursue? Like
Mm-hmm.
there's a bit of that, and to that I'm going to say it's by emotionally evoking or evoking emotions, emotionally engaging the player. There's like, for example, in the last Students of Fate episode, um, there was not probably intended to be a villain written into the caravan leader guy, but the interactions with the other NPCs who seem to be working for him or slaving for him made the player characters think this guy's a jerk. He's not a good dude. We're probably gonna
He's
have a
the worst.
problem.
Endel's
you know,
gonna Endel's gonna punch him eventually.
yeah. See,
It's
so
gonna.
so it's like this wasn't like, so it's like, oh, I wrote this caravan leader who's evil and the players are supposed to like fight him. It's like,
Mhm.
no, that's not at all what happened. There's just a caravan leader who is a certain kind of way. He's just motivated. He's just a certain kind of character. I have no power over whether the player characters like him or don't like him or engage with him or don't engage with him. But here's what I did do. I showed the players just what was going on. And
Mhm.
there were things about that situation that the players cared enough about that now they're emotionally connected to it. They're emotionally involved in it.
Mhm.
And see, this tells me of all the things that happened in that session, this was something that the player, and basically what I'm referring to here was there was the caravan leader and he was like kind of like basically offering to let them join the caravan, blah, blah, blah. But it turns out there's people working in the caravan, including these little kids, and they're like doing all this hard labor. And it seems like they're maybe being exploited, taken advantage of. And it just seems like kind of a dirty situation. It seems like how would you describe it, John? Like it seems like a sketchy
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And so
It's
it's like,
it's definitely, yeah. It's pretty horrible. Like this
yeah,
guy's
yeah.
bad. You know.
Yeah, but like so here's the thing. He's like, maybe it's coming to a point where he's kind of like a, at least in a small way, like a villain type
Yeah.
figure here in this, maybe this first
Yeah.
arc. But
Yeah.
did
He's
I
kind of a
write it
sub
that way?
villain.
Sub
Yeah.
villain, yeah, maybe so.
Yeah.
But did I write it that way? It's like, well, no, I have no idea if the players are going to care or not. But
Mhm.
he was in the caravan, and if the players showed up there, they're probably going to meet him. And then if they show up there, they're
Mhm.
probably going to see what's going on, and then they might not care, and they may just bounce on the whole caravan and say, this, I think we'd be better off on our own.
Yeah.
Or they may join the caravan, and then they start to care about something. Maybe, um, maybe they're going to care about something else, but it just so happened that the player characters did care about a certain kind of thing, and this
Yeah.
lets me know, they care about this is a
Yeah.
storyline that'll probably develop, and it's
Yeah.
based on what the players choose. So when you
Yeah.
make a villain and you want the player characters to care, find a way to emotionally like evoke them, find a way to like
Yeah.
almost like you just jab it a little bit. You throw little things out there, and then when you see that the players care, you realize, I've got it. Like now I know where the story might go because I can see what the
Yeah.
players care about. And so
Yeah.
there's a little bit of like, you
So
know,
yeah, there's. I'm thinking of a moment in Star Wars Episode 4, close to the beginning of the movie, actually, where uh, Obi-Wan is telling Luke, there's all these terrible things, and you're going to come with me. You're going to get trained as a Jedi. You're going to, you're going to change the world. And Luke is like, listen, I don't like the Empire. I hate it, but there's nothing I can do about it right now. I feel
yeah,
like the Herminator's question there is like, what if the players have that mindset? What if the players are like, oh, well, that's too big and too bad. There's nothing I can do about that. Well, the story still finds Luke, you know, and pushes him out the door, as it were. So, I mean, like as the GM, you don't have to turn your all your NPCs into orphans, or all your all your players into push them out the same way that Luke got pushed out the door, but
Yeah.
find a way to get them to engage with the story. Gently at first, but then maybe a little bit more prodding.
Yeah. Um, so there's another interesting conversation going on here. Nyla said, actually, this conversation started a little earlier. Garrick saying, "What's to stop the players from wanting to build a thieves guild and skipping the save the world arc again?" Um, and then Nihilus said, I think this is where the conversation started. Player choice, player choice. If what makes most players want to play, no. So you give them a situation, they take action. You as the GM take villain action response. This is a game, players to GM and back. And I agree with this. You're kicking a ball
Hmm.
back and forth, kind of. You're
Hmm.
kicking a ball.
It's a chess game.
And then Nihil, it is. Uh, Geo said linear adventure is not railroading. I agree. Linear adventure does not
Yeah.
have to mean railroading. Nihilus says, yep, the best railroad is your player's backstory and in-game choices. If they care for the Prince NPC, you sure can railroad all you need using this NPC and they will follow, and it's not a bad thing. Okay, I think that Nihilus is describing kind of what we were just talking about, which is if
Hmm.
if you get
Yeah.
the players to care, this
Yeah.
establishes a powerful indicator of direction for the story.
Yeah.
That
You can't.
yeah,
Yeah. You
it
can't
can
motivate
inform your
every single person the same way. As a teacher,
no,
I know that not all of my students are motivated by the same thing, and not every
yeah.
party is going to be motivated by the same thing. Find what motivates them and use that.
Yeah. No, totally. And that's part of actually that's one of the things about running games that I love to do. I love to watch what players care about individually because every character is going to care about different things. Some are going to be more motivated by like the magic weapon that they found. And then there's going to be
Sure.
another who's more interested in like the NPC and it's like a romance thing. And then someone else might be motivated by revenge more so than the others. And so it's really fun to find out what emotionally motivates the players. I think this is a fun thing. But now Nihilus continues by saying, also, it's not a bad idea to adjust expectations in between sessions. You can talk about this with your party beyond session 0 too. I agree. This is how you
Mhm.
come up with your own bullet points for session 0. Yes, I love this approach. I think you should adjust expectations between sessions. Almost every single session is just a new thing. It's like,
Yeah.
the players might choose a different thing every session. And what I mean by that is it's really good to kind of readjust. Don't hold on to a plan and then expect to just run with that for 3 sessions. What happened in the last session is going to majorly influence how you
Mhm.
move into the next session. So we have to keep updating. But then Steven says this, which is, I think, something that's really worth talking about. So, what's the difference between what you said and railroading? You pretty much forcing the plot at that point. I think that Steven was responding to Nihilus's comment here. I think is what he was responding to. Um, Actually, it might have been this comment that he was responding to. The best railroad is your player's backstory and in-game choices. So I think the answer to what Steven is saying. So what's the difference between what you said and railroading? You pretty much forcing the plot. I don't think that Nihilus is talking about forcing a plot. I think that Nihilus is going back to this, finding out what motivates your players and actually what they care about, and using that as an indicator of where they'll probably take the story. And that's a little bit of leverage because if they really
Mhm.
do care about the Prince NPC, and the Prince NPC in the next session pleads for help, says, my kingdom is in danger. My father, his rule is failing, and I really need your help. Here's what I need.
Yeah.
There's this secret meeting tonight. The wizard conclave is meeting. I need you to infiltrate it because I think that they're trying to hatch a plot to overthrow the king, right? And
Mhm.
and if they care about that NPC, there's going to be a much higher likelihood that they're going to jump on that idea instead of
Yeah.
going and just like setting up a tavern for themselves and ignoring the plot. If
Yeah.
they care about the Prince NPC enough that they're actually emotionally invested, then you can use that to to emotionally to emotionally stir them to maybe choose to go do that thing instead
Yeah.
of instead of just abandoning
Yeah.
it. Oh,
If
Steven
I
just responded.
yeah,
I was responding to what John said. Kick down Temperature.
there's a big
Oh, okay,
difference.
okay, okay, gotcha.
There's a big difference between linear adventure and railroading. What I'm describing is a linear adventure. Railroading specifically refers to when you are taking away player agency. They still had agency to start the tavern, but the story is going to find them. Any story that's big enough and bad enough is going to find them. When you play Skyrim, you you have the option to be a farmer. You could literally be a farmer. You could play as a merchant. You can play Skyrim as an NPC. The issue is the story is still there. The story is still finding you. Every time you walk by a town guard, they're going to say something about the Civil War. They're going to say something about the dragons. They're going to say something about this or that or the third. And you're still going to constantly have that nagging in the back of your mind. I should be dealing with this. And I don't feel like that's railroading. Railroading is when there's no choice, because a railroad, the reason it's called a railroad is there's literally only one place a train can go. It has no agency. It can go forward or it can stop, and that's it. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is the story finding the characters. The characters can go wherever they want, whether that's a tavern or whole hog, let's go kick down the bad guy's door. They can do either one of those things, but the villain is still there. The villain is still doing it. So there's a difference between a railroad and the story finding the players. Um,
No, yeah. Now, I also want to interject one more thing because I think Steven. So I think now. So here's I think what Steven is getting at, and Steven, thanks for dropping this clarifying comment because I feel like this really helped me to understand what you were saying in the last comment. So I think John, what Steven is saying here is when you talk about it in that sense. It
mhm,
almost makes it sound like a railroad because it's like, well, I'm gonna keep forcing this plot arc onto my characters, come hell or high water, kind of thing. Um,
mhm,
However, so Stephen, here's my response to that. And here's actually how I deal with that. I have, this is kind of rare, but I have had players really resist like the story to the point where they actually like when I started taking that approach of like the consequences coming creeping up on them for ignoring
mhm,
the said villain, like it got to a point where I tried a couple times to kind of engage them and they just didn't engage. Okay, what did this tell me? This told me they didn't care. They didn't care about that. They legitimately didn't care about that storyline arc. And I had actually, there was one point where I had an above table conversation with them. And I was like basically the villain showed up and gave like a monologue and tried to recruit them. And it was like, and then I paused for a minute and out of game, I was like, okay, wink, wink. Like as the GM, I want you to know that this is happening in game, but there's also a bigger thing happening out of game that I want to make you guys aware of. I don't actually know if you care about this villain plot arc, and I don't want to force it on you. So out of game, in game, I want you to make this decision, but also out of game, you just let me know if you don't. Because I kind of thought I was getting the idea that maybe they didn't want to have anything to do with this plot, and they just wanted to go be pirates, right? Literally, like that's what was going on in the game. So I was like, I'm kind of getting the sense that you guys may just want to go be pirates, and you may not want to be involved in this villain plot arc. And if that's the case, just let me know and like we'll work it out. Like we'll work it out.
mhm.
I
Yeah,
but so that in my way is like how Stephen, how I would deal with that because I think I see what you're saying. If I
yeah,
didn't let the players opt out of that, then we do have a situation where if it wasn't discussed in session zero, it does feel railroady,
yeah. There you
and
go.
that's how I solve it.
Yeah,
That's how I would solve it.
there's another thought. One of the great movies of my childhood, showing how old I am. The Lion King. In The Lion King, Simba has this whole phase. There's this whole part of the story where the Hakuna Matata phase of his life. He's like, you know what? I can't deal with this. I'm going to come over here. I'm going to eat bugs. I'm going to sing songs,
Yeah.
and pass gas in the jungle. And so he's over there doing that. But eventually it still comes to him because Scar in the background, even though you have no idea what Scar and the hyenas are doing at that point, you don't see that for years. I mean, Simba literally grows up. Uh, in the meantime, he goes from being this tiny little cub to a full grown lion, and and he has this face. Let your players have that face. Let them be pirates. Let them be bandits. Let them go run off and do whatever they want. But eventually, what happens? Eventually, things get so bad back in the Pride Lands that Nala goes hunting further, and it actually endangers Simba's new friends. Well,
Yeah.
now he has to deal with it at some point. I mean, he could
Yeah.
continue to ignore it, but the story still found him. And I think there's nothing wrong with taking a few sessions or even a whole
Yeah.
sub arc and let your players be pirates. Let them have a tavern.
Yeah.
Eventually, it's going to find them. Eventually, the thing is going to start affecting them in a way that they can't ignore anymore.
And it's interesting to note that when Nala came and got him, which I think Nala is one of my all time favorite Disney princesses because I think she's such a well written character. But
Yeah,
but also what enticed him back? It's
yeah,
because he cared about Nala. He literally
yeah.
was emotionally invested in Nala because she was his childhood friend and there was a love interest, romantic interest.
Mhm.
And that is such a powerful motivator. If, I mean, he in the back of his mind knew it was going on,
Yeah.
but there was, like you said, an element of him like, I just don't want to deal with this. It's like he wasn't motivated to do
Hmm.
anything about it until
Yeah.
Nala showed up, and then he cared. So it's very powerful, actually, and that technique, we can use that with our player characters, not to control what they do, but to get
Yeah.
them to care about things. And when you get players to care about things, this makes the game so much better because they
Yeah, that's
actually care. They're
yeah.
staying in step.
That's not a railroad though. I don't think
No.
because I used the analogy of a chess game earlier. You're responding one to one with the thing. So I think a railroad is when you try to plan out the entire chess game. When you're playing chess, if you try to plan from move one to move last and you have the whole thing, and then you start telling the other player, no, 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 you were supposed to move here. No, 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 you were supposed to move the knight over here and you were supposed to do this and it's going to give you this awesome finish. It's like, wait a minute, you still need to let them move their pieces the way they want to move them, and you need to move at a one to one. I don't think that's a railroad. That's part of what you're supposed to do with your prep time is figure out how does what the players just did affect the world and the
Yeah.
big bad.
And a great indicator of where it's going is to pay attention to what the characters seem to care about. And
Mm-hmm.
they'll probably go in that direction, which is actually, that is challenging, but it takes some practice, but
Mm-hmm.
it's such a powerful way to do it. But anyway, all right. We are at 7:04 a.m. Going to wrap it up. Going to give final comments here. John, what's your final word on this? What's your final comment? On this topic, we've come around. The topic: are too many GMs trying to be novelists instead of game masters? What's your final comment?
I think there's a interesting point here where some GMs are like, well, I'm more of an improviser. I like to run a sandbox. Some GMs are like, well, I really want this narrative campaign, and so I really want to pre-plan everything out. And I think there is that middle ground, and we need to remember that it's not an improv class. It's not improv comedy. We're not doing the, oh man, what's the name of the show? Whose line is it anyway? It's not whose line is it anyway. You're also not writing a novel. We're playing a game, and when you play a game, one player moves, then the other player moves. One player moves, the other player moves. You as the GM are one half of that, right? You write the world. You should. That is your job as the GM. You come up with what's going on in the world. You should. That's what the GM does. But don't try to control what the players do. The players do, the world responds to that. The villain responds to that. And so, yeah, you can have a narrative there, but if you expect the players to have a certain uh, you expect them to do certain things or even start forcing them to do certain things. Or like, no, 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 you wouldn't do that. You would go this other way. That's where it gets railroady, and that's where it's narcissist. That's where it's a novelist. That's where you have these, the horror stories on Reddit that go on. It's like, well, this GM just didn't let us do anything. I think that you need to have that balance in mind. You do game master. You master the game. You have to that know all of that, the background. You set the scene, but as far as what the protagonists do when they take the stage is completely up to them. And then between sessions, you're going to respond to that. You're going to figure out, okay, well, how did that affect it? And that is where how you avoid the railroad. That's how you afford. You kind of avoid writing a novel, and instead you have that living, breathing world that the players actually have an effect on. And so there is a balance there. Understand your world, understand your villains, understand all of those things, and prepare your session by all means, but go into that session holding it with open hands, and understand that if you try to hold the story, you're gonna strangle it, you're gonna stifle it. So that's my 2 cents there. It is a 1-to-1. You play chess one move at a time, and you play D&D one session at a time.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that my 2 cents and wrapping this up is very simple. Um, uh, are too many GMs trying to be novelists instead of game masters? I'm not sure, but I would encourage every GM. I would encourage every single GM to let go, to let go of preconceived
Mm-hmm.
ideas and to embrace the concept of, I'm so excited to see where the story goes. And that's part of the magic of D&D, is because, rather than it being a book that we're trying to follow and have like stressing about that or pressuring yourself to do that, just let it go and say, hey, actually, this is a player driven experience. I'm filling in the pixels. I can let go of preconceived ideas. I don't have to pressure myself about plot. I'm going to wait and see what the player characters do. And then it's going to be so exciting to see what we come up with together as we create
Yeah.
this. And don't be afraid of that improvisation. Trust your instincts. I think that probably a lot more game masters are, if they would let go of all their, like, if they let go of the preconceived ideas and they would lean into improvisation. I've been hearing this a lot. GM saying, well, I'm just not good at improvising. I'll bet you're better at improvising than you think you are,
Yeah.
especially if you really leaned
Oh
into
yeah.
it and if you went with your instincts and just let yourself do it. And
Yeah.
I think that and it does take practice. And I do, and it's also understanding that it doesn't have to be perfect. Improvising an NPC does not have to be this perfect thing where you're never going to make a mistake, or you're never going to, maybe, you know, you might not have the perfect accent. You might not get the quirks exactly right all the time,
Yeah.
but that's such a non-issue, because by the time you're letting the players create their own destiny, you're already winning to such a massive extent, and they're not going to even really care or notice if you break the accent for just a second, just because you improvise this character and didn't have a chance to practice it, and it's just, but it's still fun, whatever. There's my 2 cents. Try a little more
Yeah.
improvisation. Let go of preconceived ideas. Don't I think it's stressful to hold on to those preconceived ideas about the story. I think it's
Mm-hmm.
stressful. I don't like it. I love watching the players do stuff, and then it's like, that's where we're going. Awesome. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Like, let's do it.
Yeah. Oh,
And
I
then
agree.
it's just fun to me. Yeah. All right. Very good. I want to thank everyone for tuning in. I want to give another shout out to our Ko-Fi supporters. I know Mr. Vincent's in the house. Mr. Vincent's a Ko-Fi supporter. There's probably others here. Craig is in here. Gold level Ko-Fi supporter. Thank you so much for everything you do. There's probably others in here who are as well, but I'm getting to a point where I sometimes don't recognize them between the Discord and here, because people have different names and stuff. But thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you, John, for being a part
Yeah.
of the show this morning. And yeah, it's all made up and the points don't matter. That's pretty much exactly right. Do you remember whose line is it anyway?
Yeah.
The show where
Yeah.
everything's made up and the points don't matter.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
love it. I love it. All right. Everyone, have a great day. Have a great weekend. Roll some D100s for us at your next game. Check out the stuff in the description. If you want to be awesome like us, play awesome games like us, join the Discord and hang out with us. It'd be awesome. So go boldly. Absolutely. Go boldly this Saturday. All right. Have a good one, everyone. Talk to you on the
Yep.
next one.